When you hear the name Thunderbolt, you're hearing of one of the most rugged fighters in the skies of World War II. The P-47 had a reputation for durability, firepower, and the uncanny knack of bringing its pilot home even when it looked like a wreck. But among its many stories, one stands out. A P-47 so badly shot up that German pilots who inspected it refused to believe it still flew. In the skies over Europe, as Allied forces pushed toward Germany in 1944, the air war grew brutal. The U.S. fighter groups that flew the P-47, nicknamed the Jug or Thunderbolt, found themselves strafing ground targets, being hammered by flak, attacked by German interceptors. The plane's design would be tested time and again. Let's go back to one such engagement. On June 26, 1943, 2nd Lieutenant Robert S. Johnson of the 56th Fighter Group was flying his P-47 when it was jumped by a formation of German fighters. According to his record, 21 20mm cannon shells struck his aircraft, wrecking systems, setting fires, and jamming controls. By the time he landed, he attempted to count the bullet holes, but gave up after the tally passed 200 without even circumnavigating the aircraft. The P-47 had done the impossible. But let's shift our focus now to a related, lesser-known story, an example where the enemy, the Germans, captured and flew a P-47. They studied it, flew it under their markings, and their pilots were shocked at what they saw. A machine that had literally been perforated but still airborne. Reports suggest the Luftwaffe test pilot Hans Verbner Lersche looked at one of the captured P-47s and called it precious, and admitted he had never seen such damage before. In the thick of the Allied offensive in 1944-45, numerous P-47s returned to base battered by flak, machine gun fire, ground weaponry. According to a feature in aviation history, one Thunderbolt returned so shot up you could crawl through those holes in the wing. This resilience set the stage for the incident we're about to explore. When the Germans captured one of these jugs, they weren't just interested in a trophy. They wanted to understand how it had taken what it did and still flown. They mounted it in one of their technical evaluation units, applied German markings, and tested it in the skies. Their pilots who faced it, flew it, and remarked on its uncanny survivability. They refused at first to believe the damage it had sustained could still permit flight until they saw it themselves. What you are about to hear is a three-part journey. First, the design and combat environment that made such damage possible and survivable. Second, the capture and German evaluation of the machine. And third, the lessons learned about aircraft design, damage tolerance, and how the Thunderbolt's legacy endured past the war. As you listen, keep in mind, this isn't just a war story. It's an engineering story, one about redundancy, material toughness, design margins, and human pilots pushing machines to their limits, and how even the enemy respected what those machines could take. So let's begin with the first part of the story, the P-47's design and the brutal environment in which it proved itself. The P-47 was large. It had a massive radial engine, the Pratt & Whitney R-2800, that itself acted as a kind of frontline shield. Unlike many fighters that used liquid-cooled engines with vulnerable radiators, the P-47's design meant less risk from a single-hit disabling cooling. Its 8 50-caliber machine guns, heavy payload capacity for bombs and rockets, made it a formidable ground attack fighter. But more importantly for our story, its structure. The airframe was built to take damage. Its fuselage and wing structure used heavy gauge materials and incorporated rugged mounting for the engine. The reasons behind this include the role the P-47 was asked to play: high-altitude escort, dive bombing, low-level strafing runs. Each scenario involved extreme stresses and risk. The designers knew the aircraft would take hits, and so they built in resilience. When P-47s flew into low-level ground attack missions in late 1944 and early 1945, they came under intense fire from anti-aircraft guns, small arms, and enemy fighters. The devastating flak belts covering German-held territory were relentless. Many P-47s returned riddled with holes, often thousands of rounds perforating the skin, panels patched in field, some wings missing chunks. yet they returned. These combat reports often mention the pilot walking away and counting holes as a badge of survival. One pilot described the sound of incoming shells through his wing as a sewing machine. These stories underscore just how extreme the damage environment was, and how the aircraft design held up. That brings us to the moment when the Germans captured one. What they expected, what they found, and how the engineering conversation shifted. In the earlier portion of our story, we explored how the P-47 Thunderbolt earned its reputation for absorbing damage. Now we turn to the moment when one of these machines found itself in enemy hands. The incident itself is less documented than many air combat stories, but the pieces are clear. The Germans had captured at least one P-47, repainted it with German insignia, used it for testing, and possibly propaganda. And their pilots credited the machine's durability with a kind of disbelief. According to one account, German troops observed a P-47 flying over with crosses on its wings, one of the cases where the machine had been captured and taken into Luftwaffe evaluation units. As one retrospective account reads, "Our welcoming was short-lived. It turned out to be an American P-47 as evidenced by the German crosses on its wings." The captured aircraft bore the physical scars of its service: bullet holes, cannon shell penetrations, structural repairs, patched panels. German engineers studied it, German pilots flew it, and they had to reconcile two truths. First, the machine was tremendously scarred. Second, it still flew well enough to be test-flown. That contradicted much of their expectation. The German test pilot Hans Werbner Lersche described the P-47 as precious, standing in front of it and saying, "At long last I was standing in front of the legendary Thunderbolt." What the Germans found surprising was not simply that the machine held together, but how it did so. Recall the German-engineered aircraft often emphasized performance, but not always heavy armor or high damage tolerance. The P-47's design leaned heavily into survivability. And when the Germans encountered it, they saw a fighter that seemed engineered for endurance rather than only agility. In one anecdote from the field, a pilot reported that despite holes stitching his wing with a sound like a sewing machine, the P-47 kept flying. From the German side, the captured P-47 provided valuable technical intelligence. What made it tough? Why could it take so many hits? Engineers examined the radial engine's placement, the thick fuselage structure, the absence of vulnerable radiators, the overall bulk of the aircraft skin. Pilots who flew it during test flights reported a sense of how much one more hit it could take before critical failure. Pilot testimonies suggest that German flyers looking it over were initially skeptical. They could conceive of a fighter with 20-30 holes, but not one with hundreds. Yet photographs from U.S. units show P-47s returning with 100-plus holes, occasionally well over 200. One pilot's tally stopped when the count passed 200. The captured machine's role extended beyond test flights. It was used in propaganda films. The Germans repainted it back into U.S. markings for filming, then repainted into German crosses. That alone tells us the Germans saw value in the psychology of the aircraft, not just its performance. The fact that the enemy would reuse your aircraft in your markings for propaganda says something about how they respected it. On the operational front, German ground troops reported seeing a P-47 strafing them in what appeared to be German markings. One after-action report noted, "A P-47 that was captured by the Germans. We'd like to think this is one of them." All of this contributes to the mythic status of this particular story. Captured, repaired, flown, and scrutinized by your enemy. And through it all, the machine that once landed home covered in holes became an object of study. But why did the P-47 survive what it did? What engineering features enabled that survival, and what lessons did the Germans glean? Those questions bring us to the final part of our story, where we'll dissect design, damage tolerance, legacy, and what engineers learned from this remarkable machine. Key insights from the captured aircraft. Damage tolerance. The P-47's large radial engine in front acted as a blunt shield. Its rugged build meant it could take frontal or flight path hits and still maintain power. redundancy and simplicity, use of thick structure, fewer vulnerable systems, no radiator cooling core as in liquid-cooled fighters, meant fewer catastrophic failures from one hit. Field survivability. Maintenance crews in the field often patched sheet metal, replaced small structural components. The P-47's modular design helped. Its sheer size allowed damage absorption. Psychological impact. For the Germans, examining such a battered machine which still flew challenged their assumptions about Allied machines. That in itself was a strategic psychological effect. In the next part, we'll explore the legacy of that captured P-47 and how its lessons carried into post-war design, aviation engineering, and how the Thunderbolt's legend lives on today. The captured P-47 provided the Germans and the Allies alike with a rare opportunity to examine extreme combat damage and survivability in a real-world scenario. Among the many engineering takeaways, structural over-engineering pays off. The P-47 was heavier than many contemporaries, but its robust fuselage and wing structure meant it could take significant damage without catastrophic failure. Simpler systems reduce failure points. The radial engine design and fewer vulnerable cooling and plumbing lines meant that when flak or bullets hit, critical systems were less likely to fail instantly. Damage tolerance is strategic. When a fighter pilot knows his machine can take hits and still bring him home, that increases combat effectiveness, morale, and mission persistence. The Germans saw this firsthand when they looked at the battered captured machine. Field repairability matters. The ability for ground crews to patch up a P-47 and send it back into the fight meant fewer write-offs and better asset usage. The captured example showed many patched holes and makeshift repairs that still held structural integrity. Stories abound of P-47s returning with hundreds of bullet holes. One hot-as-dog rumor: a pilot landed, got out, began counting holes, and stopped when he passed 200 and still hadn't walked around the aircraft. While exact numbers may vary, the pattern is clear. This aircraft survived damage levels many believed would be fatal. The captured example added to the myth. For German crews to inspect a craft covered in holes, flown under enemy markings, and still in the air, that reinforced the P-47's legend. It became more than steel and rivets. It became proof of concept. After the war, aviation engineering increasingly incorporated resilience and damage tolerance into fighter and bomber design. While jet-age designs prioritized speed and stealth, the Thunderbolt story reminded engineers that survivability still mattered. The concept of building in damage tolerance, from self-sealing fuel tanks to redundant hydraulic systems, drew on lessons from machines like the P-47. Furthermore, the captured P-47 story is an example of how equipment ends up in enemy hands and becomes a source of intelligence. The Germans did not just admire the machine, they repurposed it for training, propaganda, and evaluation. That fact underscores the multi-layered nature of technological warfare. Your engineering becomes part of the enemy's study. For the pilots and ground crews who flew and maintained the Thunderbolt, its durability saved lives. For enemy pilots who saw it come back, flown by the Allies covered in holes, they respected it. For German test pilots who flew a captured one, they learned what Allied engineering could achieve. The human dimension of this story is captured in the awe in their voices, the disbelief in their eyes, and the respect it earned. Today, engineers and aviation historians still reference the P-47's durability. It serves as a benchmark for what a fighter aircraft can endure. Whether in flight training, museum exhibits, or popular history, the image of a Thunderbolt covered in damage but still flying home remains powerful. Moreover, the story of the captured aircraft raises questions about how we evaluate equipment, reliability, maintainability, damage tolerance. It reminds us that a combat-ready aircraft is not just about performance numbers on a slide, but the messy, unforgiving environment of war. The captured P-47, battered but airborne, teaches that sometimes the greatest engineering triumph isn't speed or agility, it's survival. When the German pilots surveyed the captured P-47 and refused to believe it could fly, they were acknowledging something deeper, an acknowledgement of a design philosophy they hadn't expected. In the face of hundreds of bullet holes, missing panels, patched skin, the machine still flew. It still performed. It still returned. That is engineering success. In the annals of aviation history, that captured fighter stands out not simply as an enemy acquisition, but as a witness to resilience. It was a machine the Germans captured to study and ended up respecting. It became a testament to the Allied industrial machine, pilot courage, and wartime engineering ethos. Build tough, build for battle, bring them home. As you reflect on this story, consider this. How far beyond raw numbers does true capability lie? How much does the ability to endure matter in war, in engineering, in design? The P-47 story, and the captured version of it, answers that question with silence and steel.